Hey, wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 35 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Today, we're going to be discussing, as usual, the latest in this week and even last week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics. We've got a lot to cover today, and today the main theme is going to be around how the US election may impact Bitcoin in the short term, and in fact, how Bitcoin may impact the US election as well. So welcome everybody. Hope you're all in coming in okay. We should be live on multiple outlets right now. Welcome on Facebook, welcome on LinkedIn, welcome on YouTube, welcome on X. I think most of you tune in from X and watch the recording on YouTube. But we're going to get started right now, and we're going to jump in with the first section, which is this week in Bitcoin. And obviously the theme is going to be around everything that's happening in the US election and how the US election is actually, to some degree, being determined by the Bitcoin lobby. A new lobby hits town. And this lobby is slightly different. While we do have some of the Bitcoiners that are actually contributing millions and millions of dollars to political campaigns, the different type of Bitcoin lobby is those that own Bitcoin, that are deciding that they're going to be voting with their feet. And Donald Trump came out and said that he wishes to be, let's see the word, the crypto president in San Francisco tech fundraiser. So he was raising funds at a tech fundraiser in San Francisco, and he said, I want to be the crypto president. Now, this is a significant pivot from a few elections ago when he was president, and he was very bullish on the dollar and bearish on Bitcoin. So let's not forget that. But having said that, Bitcoin has become a very, very different asset class and vehicle and technology for savings. And the number of Americans that own Bitcoin right now has become so significant that there is a thing called the Bitcoin voter. And so Donald Trump recognized that. And I don't want to give full credit to Donald Trump because he did copy RFK, to be fair. RFK came to the Bitcoin Miami conference and he said that he is making the announcement. He thinks that the Bitcoiners are significant and he is going to be raising funds in Bitcoin. Trump copied that one. And he recognized what a landslide and what a bit of a mountain it caused. And so after that, game theory kicks in, and the Biden campaign was scrambling to say, hey, we like crypto. I promise you we like crypto. We've been doing everything we can to support the bank lobby and all the lobbies and that don't want crypto to be. But, you know, the judge got in our way, so we had to approve the Bitcoin ETF. We fought as hard as we could against it. But now BlackRock said, I'll come along and I'll create the Bitcoin ETF, and Fidelity come along, and all the largest fund managers, and JP Morgan said, we can't beat it. We'll be a part of it. And so fighting and screaming, Biden said, we will start accepting crypto payments. Looks like I'm going to have to start accepting crypto payments. So now you can donate through Coinbase Commerce. Coinbase, full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Coinbase. Before it went public, I was an early investor in the private equity of Coinbase, and they custody many of the Bitcoins for these ETFs as well. But they are using Coinbase Commerce. The Democratic Biden administration is using that in order to accept payments. Now, you know the irony of that. The irony of that is that the SEC is coming after Coinbase thanks to Elizabeth Warren and the cronies that Donald Trump set out to try and expose in order to win over the Bitcoin and crypto vote. But Coinbase is still being sued by the SEC for supporting unregistered, unlicensed securities, even though it is a registered money transmitter. But on that as well, it looked like there was some serious political pressure. We've covered this one in previous. But now the SEC's investigation into the Ethereum Foundation for ETH 2.0, which is the post-merge staking proof of stake version of Ethereum, is no longer being investigated as a security, allegedly. So this paves the way for BlackRock to say, hey, SEC, we would like to get this ETF approved, and we're going to chuck some money over to Congress and the banking and financial lobby. And then you do as you say and go tell those silly regulators that they don't care about consumer protection. They only care about the $4.5 billion that they fined Terraform Labs and Do Kwon for. So the SEC is coming after him for the Terraform Labs, the Terra Luna, and decided that investors lose $60 billion, $20 billion in a little shitcoin, and $40 billion in an algorithmic stable coin that's meant to be decentralized, where Do Kwon was able to pay central banker by buying a bunch of Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin went down because interest rates spiked, because Putin and Saudi Arabia colluded in OPEC to keep the constriction of oil supply, which then broke the US banking system, which created the crypto market to go through and exposed all the Ponzi schemes like Celsius and FTX. But now the $4.7 billion goes to the SEC, while all the victims just lose their $60 billion. I guess there is a free market for investors, and then there is a crony capitalist market for the SEC themselves, who obviously is signaling, do I really care about consumers and consumer protection? Well, SEC, if you care about consumers, $4.5 billion would create a little bit of a recovery and restore our faith in the US justice system. The US justice system has scammed billions of dollars in legal fees out of investors that were already victims of Ponzi schemes. We'll see whether that happens. I doubt it. But as a result of all of this, there is now a competition to be the Bitcoin president that accepts crypto payments, that frees Ross Ulbricht, a crypto Bitcoin pioneer in the early days, that created a website that allowed people to go connect with each other and transact on a peer-to-peer basis. Because they could transact on a peer-to-peer basis, they ended up using it in order to deal in clean drugs free of chemicals that had good ratings and didn't mean you have to go meet a gangster on the street just because over 100 years ago, the British Empire raided Hong Kong and got China addicted to opium and created the drugs trade by trying to rape India and, I'm not allowed to say that word on YouTube, got to be careful, tried to grape India and China of their gold and silver, and created the drugs trafficking trade through China and its opium wars. We will cover that in another one if we want another time. But because of that, Ross Ulbricht created a website that allowed people to buy and connect online. They use Bitcoin as the payment method. And he is locked up for like 400 years or something ridiculous, maybe 150, can't quite remember, the rest of his life. But Donald Trump came out and said, I'll free him. And RFK said, I'll free him if I get made president. So existing promises, free. There will be a presidential pardon for Ross Ulbricht if RFK or Trump becomes the next president. Biden, you can do it now if you want. Why not? If you want the crypto vote, us Bitcoiners, we like free trade, and America's meant to be a free market. And I know the Federal Reserve occupied you in 1913 and created the market that you have today, the Fed market, and there is no free market. But maybe the US politicians want to do that to try and get the Bitcoin vote. Well, so this means that really we had our halving cycle where we've had our Bitcoin halving. We kicked off into the next 4-year halving cycle. Now, historically, it's around about after this summer that Bitcoin hits new all-time highs in the previous 4 cycles. And so we got an early new all-time high, but inflation adjusted, it wasn't a new all-time high. Now, we could say that's manipulation of numbers, just as inflation is. But do we hit a new all-time high? Well, if it goes as it is right now, and the US politics becomes one of the important factors, obviously staying out of war is a good idea. We'd all be happy to stay out of war. But also, we'd like some support around property rights, the ability to self-custody Bitcoin, all of the things I covered in my previous broadcast. When you Americans, we're all going to be impacted. You get to vote, but fight for your freedom of speech and your constitutional rights. It means that maybe we return to the halving cycle, which means that if you are going by historical, and historical past performance is no indication of future performance, and none of this should be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. However, it's a possibility that we get our quiet summer just like we normally do. And because of the ETFs, all of those different compliance departments and fund managers, they all go away. Maybe that causes a little bit of correction. But as we get closer and closer to the election cycle, as Bitcoin becomes a bigger and bigger part of the election, then we should go into maybe our new all-time high cycle. So let's see. I don't normally talk about price because if you know me, I'm a Bitcoin thinker, and a Bitcoin thinker means I loves me some cheap Bitcoin. And by having some cheap Bitcoin means that I get to buy more Bitcoin with my fiat currency, which I do every month, and I will continue to do ever since I first discovered it in 2011. So the price going up just means that it's less of an opportunity. So stack those sats, as we say in the Bitcoin community. Well, anyway, the election's going to be in November. We're going to know the outcome of that. We hold Trump accountable. And we may not even have an election with Biden and Trump. I mean, Biden is looking very sketchy at the moment, and Trump looks like they're trying to put him in prison. Fortunately, he took $100 million from the Israeli lobby, and that means that you normally don't get assassinated. So Trump may make it to the next election, and maybe that keeps him out of prison as well. But he's, we may even get an election. We don't know. It may be full of surprises. But I'm expecting a quiet summer, which means an accumulation phase. And Donald Trump said, what was his final words, more recent words this week? We would like all of the remaining Bitcoin to be made in the USA. As ridiculous as that sounds, it is actually a brilliant theoretical game where Trump is saying we want it to be made in the USA. There is a buoyant Bitcoin mining industry in Texas, the center of energy and oil and natural gas within America, and the center of Bitcoin mining. Those publicly traded mining companies are all, traded on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, sorry. And Trump wants to support the industry, all of the different Bitcoin miners, the riots, the marathons, the Bitcoin OGs, the Winklevoss twins. You saw photo after photo where Trump was courting Bitcoiners and the Bitcoin lobbies. And what did we see? We saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Tyler Winklevoss, the Winklevoss twins, settled with Facebook and put millions and millions into Bitcoin, and were one of the first to accumulate a position of, I think, after Satoshi Nakamoto. Can't remember whether it was 100,000 or 200,000. I think it was 200,000 Bitcoin in the early days, because they bumped into Charlie Shrem in a nightclub in Ibiza, and Charlie Shrem was buying those Bitcoin for the Winklevoss twins, and they created the most exotic multi-signature cold storage paper wallet stored in multiple banks around all different states across the US. So those 200,000 Bitcoins are next to impossible to get until they actually decide that they want to do that. But Tyler Winklevoss came out and said, I'm donating $1 million worth of Bitcoin, which was 15.47 Bitcoin at the time, to the Donald Trump campaign, and said, I will be voting for him in November. His twin brother as well said the same, and said that he donated another $1 million, Cameron Winklevoss, and they went over, and the Bitcoin lobby is becoming a thing. So we have gone from, in that 2011 conference that I attended, a bunch of crazies that were never going to succeed, to actually playing the same game, but slightly different, of the largest power structures in the world. And I prefer doing all this through a free market, and I think it will be done as a free market. But at the end of the day, governments will have to get on board, and they are getting on board. I said this all along. Individuals led the charge, then corporations. We created Bank to the Future. We've always had a Bitcoin balance sheet. Then large public traded companies like MicroStrategy. Then we had sovereign nations like El Salvador. And now we have probably central bank digital currencies that will look to back themselves by Bitcoin as central banks start to put together the regulations from the Bank for International Settlements in 2025 to put Bitcoin and crypto on their balance sheet. At the same time, we had a bunch of drama around these crazy meme coins. People launch these things all the time. There's been like 450,000 of these things. Some of them were launching on Bitcoin. Now they're launching on Solana. Some are on Ethereum. But let me make sure I say the name right. Martin Shkreli. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Shkreli. Martin Shkreli. He was famous because he got done by the SEC and committed securities fraud around the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't know him too much, but he was heavily vocal around when SBF was going to prison. Well, he admitted after initially denying it that he created or was involved in creating a Trump meme token called, and this is no advice, I haven't touched this, I don't touch any of these coins, but the DJT, Donald J. Trump coin. And it was initially connected to Trump. It was created by his son, but all of this evidence came out, and there was a live trial on X Spaces where he had defend himself and share why he was involved, why he initially denied it, what extent Trump was involved in it, whether it was his son, whether it was his father, but it was a massive pump and dump. And the token still goes. Once you create these tokens, they don't go away as long as exchanges make markets. I came up on the space. He was saying he had a meeting with Kraken. I'm a shareholder in Kraken. So thought if I could message the CEO of Kraken, see if any information came out, whether that meeting happened. To me, it looks like I don't want to take too much of an opinion, but the overwhelming evidence is that Martin was not lying about being involved in the coin, but he was initially lying about not being involved in the coin. So Donald Trump's son, Barron Trump, it seems like he got some legal advice and was told step away from this project after working on the project. And now we have this Trump coin that's got massive controversy, created a pump and dump. And as soon as it dumped, obviously Trump doesn't want that to affect the campaign. The lawyers, the campaign get involved, and we have this thing. He submitted, Martin, he submitted about 1,000 pieces of evidence to various members of the community, giving evidence that Barron actually was involved, and this was, in fact, his project. So we will continue to watch that. It was a bit of a crypto drama that happens. But what's interesting is we had this in the FTX SBF case. SBF came up on X Spaces, and we were interrogating him. So way before it went to court, he had the X Space interrogation, and we got him to admit to many of his lies that he was saying, and we got him to admit that he was trading with client money on that X Space, and it ended up being used partly towards evidence in the actual case. So we have this really weird thing. Speaking of which, if you are still trading on OKX, there was massive outflows of funds from OKX. It's an exchange. I met the guys back in when I lived in Hong Kong over there. They were originally one of the big three exchanges in China, which was OKX. God, you're testing my memory now. Who else was there? This was way before Binance. We had OKX, which was OKCoin. And I can't even remember the other two. Bobby Lee, the brother of Charlie Lee. Bit. Oh God, iBit. Anyway, there were three big exchanges at the time. And then obviously the Korean exchanges came along, and then the American exchanges, and then we had Binance and everyone. But a bunch of that volume went into Binance. And so there was massive flows from OKX into Binance. And Binance actually surpassed, now that it has exited the US altogether and focused on non-US, it now has 200 million active users. So it seems like there are 200 million active users that have Binance accounts as a proxy for the level of adoption. And there were lots of charts that I put out on X Spaces today, where I was sharing some charts around how Bitcoin is getting higher year-on-year adoption than the internet, bringing us up to a certain point. So it's very, very interesting to see. Right. Now let's look at the corporate side. So we've now got 34 approximately spot Bitcoin ETFs, which means that people can invest in their pension funds, their trade unions, their corporations, their IRAs that own over 1 million Bitcoin now. So last time I looked, 1,031,978 Bitcoin are held within the Bitcoin ETFs, which means that you've got the Satoshi wallets, which are about 1 million Bitcoin, and now you've got 1 million held in Coinbase custody and Fidelity custody, backed by these stock market flows as well. We started to see some, more interesting adoption as well from Union. Let me make sure I got the name right here. Taunton Firefighters. Sorry if I got firefighters. Sorry if I got that wrong. Taunton Firefighters Local 138. They became the fourth union. Now we got fourth unions in the US to place Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And we also had an announcement from T-Mobile. For those of you that don't know, whichever country you're in, I think T-Mobile is the largest telecom in the world. I think it's 3 times the footprint of Verizon. And I think it's about double the footprint of AT&T. They just announced that they are currently running Bitcoin nodes, which is really cool. They're planning to launch into the Bitcoin mining sector and mining industry. So you have miners that mine the Bitcoin. They receive the block reward for proving that they're doing work, expending electricity, which repurposes renewable energy into Bitcoin mining. And we're seeing a massive amount of innovation of people living off the grid with Bitcoin now and repurposing their Bitcoin mining rigs in order to heat their houses. And we're seeing this incredible wave of innovation, which I think is really exciting to see. So now we got large telcos, we got grids, we've got, who else did we have? We've got Dell that came out just today. They posted on X a meme that they got from Michael Saylor with a Bitcoin cookie monster. As the prices are down, Michael Saylor said, we're going to eat up some more of these Bitcoin. And then Dell came out and said they got, I think, last time I looked, don't correct me, I haven't checked this as well, but I think they got, it's either 17 billion or 7 billion on their balance sheet in cash reserves. Now they look like they might be the next. This is speculation just based upon what we saw on X. They might be signaling that they're getting into their Bitcoin treasury play. Speaking of the Bitcoin treasury play, MicroStrategy came out and said, we bought another $780 million worth of Bitcoin at the same time as the German government. The German government who seized 50,000 Bitcoin started selling into those buying. And so we got the German government selling. We got the US government selling. Think about this for a second. So I think Germany sold about 3,000 Bitcoin in the last week or so. Think about this for a second. Imagine you have the ability to print the dollar, you're the Fed, and you have the ability to print the euro because Europe is essentially big Germany. And you decide that you're going to seize some Bitcoin, the hardest, rarest digital hard sound money that the world has ever seen, that has outperformed every single asset class in history ever since it launched. And every 4-year cycle, it's getting more and more scarce to the point where only about 1 million is left to be mined. You decide that even though you can print dollars and print euros, that you're going to take your Bitcoin that you seized and buy some euros and dollars, an asset that by definition will lose 99.9% of its value and already has. And you decide to take Bitcoin and buy euros and dollars. Maybe you know somebody very close to yourself, look in the mirror, that maybe has done something as silly and crazy as that. Get it right. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference, save in Bitcoin, and then you can go to more exotic investments as you choose and hedging strategies. But somebody write a memo to the German government and the US government that buying dollars that you can print and euros with your Bitcoin is about the dumbest move that you can ever make. And that's why we want smaller governments, not larger governments, because they make all sorts of silly decisions like that. Basically, because of holding this, they even got the evidence. They had a surge of $1.1 billion in unrealized profits just by seizing those 50,000 Bitcoin and holding them in the time that they did. The current value of their holdings is about $3.2 billion. So get it right. Now, somebody that does know that is stablecoins. And so stablecoins like Tether is now the world's largest stablecoin. And they take their money that they get the trend right. So they give people utility by disrupting banking, by giving people the ability to send dollars around the world and create full reserve banking by backing it by US treasuries. US treasuries pay a coupon and a yield. They take that yield and they invest some of it in Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And then they hold that and then they get unrealized gains as they do that. Now, obviously, stable coins in both Europe and America are a huge target because the biggest threat to fractional reserve banking, as I've always said, is full reserve banking. It's why back in 2011, in 2010, it was 2009, I think, when we first announced it. We wanted to create a non-fractional reserve bank, a bank to the future. We ended up pivoting to securities and funding all the companies, many of the companies that made our industry, and getting many of our investors wealthy by buying Bitcoin and creating Bitcoin-backed mining securities and Bitcoin bonds and all those types of things. But we wanted to create a non-fractional reserve bank, and the bank said, no, you got to take some more risk. Build it on top of Barclays. Make sure you lever up your client assets. You can't give people full reserve banking. So stablecoins came and did it instead. Now, obviously, the writing, between the walls, these are centralized companies. So they're subject to all the regulations. The US, after the election, will likely have their stablecoin regulations. And the EU have said by the end of this year, you've got to comply with these travel rules and various other regulations. So companies like Tether and Circle, Circle's got a license in France, but it's not compliant with the new MISA rules. They're going to have to do that by the end of this year. And so they started to launch new products. And maybe this is a hedge because rather than being connected to treasuries, it created what they called a new synthetic dollar that is backed by gold. Now, this one's a really interesting one to watch. No endorsement whatsoever. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex, which is in the same group of companies as Tether, but I'm also a shareholder in Circle, who launched a USD stablecoin. I always like to disclose these things. I'm just a geek watching these things, but obviously I also invest in line with the things that I'm saying. But a synthetic dollar backed by gold means non-fractional reserve. It's not decentralized, so it'd be centralized. So we need some transparency on the algorithm. But essentially, it allows you to send dollars around the world without the exposure of the credit rating of the US government and being backed by gold. Maybe this is something that can happen completely outside of US. So my guess is that as US and European regulations heat up, maybe this is their next move to show how you can have a stable coin. That is, if a certain stable coin needed to be unwound and moved into this, none of this is based upon insider information. This is just my speculation. maybe synthetics backed by gold is another interesting thing. We shall watch. We shall see. Right, that's all the Bitcoin news. Let's move over to the macro news. We got macro and geopolitics. If you're enjoying this, and then please do me a favor. If you're watching this, whichever network, please share this with as many people as possible. I want as many people prepared. I want as many people understanding, because there is some serious stuff happening. While it's all interesting in the Bitcoin space, I love these price corrections. They're always good to get more people in. There is some serious stuff happening in the macro side. You know me. I believe that all fiat currencies are proof of weapons networks that are the world's largest regulated Ponzi schemes, with lobby groups as nodes and banks as miners that get to profit from the creation of these US dollar and euro digital currencies that slowly create inflation through central banking, that creates the largest wealth inequality and rich-poor divide, until eventually we, the people, end up revolting because they either invested in Bitcoin, but those that didn't invest in Bitcoin and hold through the cycle end up deep in debt, and the system not working, paying massive interest rates on credit card, like 30% and payday loans, while the wealthy get to leverage their stocks, borrow from the central bank at 0% interest, and until we eventually have the position where we are now, where the wealthiest 1% own 50% of all the stocks, and the system just doesn't quite work, and so everyone starts going against each other. Well, we had signals. The US federal interest payments, they now exceed the interest on the debt, exceed the entire defense budget of America. Now, we know the defense budget is split into several pieces. It's not really a defense budget through foreign policy. It is an attack budget. And the attack budget is used because the military industrial complex lobby that owns Congress get those Congress to change laws in order to make it where more and more people have to spend on weapons, and you get organizations like NATO that then use organizations like the IMF in order to create destabilizations in certain regions so they can lend more of their IMF budget and then persuade them to spend it back into their NATO budget, which then goes back into the US military industrial complex, which redistributes wealth away from those that are on the wrong side of inflation to those that bought the assets and own the stocks. The money comes back around. The Federal Reserve prints it. And we end up in the situation we are in right now, where all of the average people are paying and suffering a cost of living crisis from inflation, while the interest on that debt, which goes to the banking lobby, the banking system, and the Federal Reserve, the government is okay with it. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they get to expand and get more, and the companies get more influence through the lobbies. And it creates that inflation where now the budget, which is 4 times greater than China. Obviously, China, Iran, and Russia combined are trying to compete now as we move to this multipolar world. We'll cover that more in the geopolitical side. But just the interest on the inflation is equal to the attack budget of America. And they spend a lot. But at the same time, inflation, we're told, has fallen to 3.3%. The print came out, the CPI print and the PPI print. That was lower than expectations. And as we move into a election cycle, obviously with numbers like PPI, the producer price index, it fell down in May. After it was increasing, it dropped by 0.2% month on month. After it was rising in April by 0.5%. And so obviously the cronies that are paid by the banking lobby will come out and lobby for lower interest rates in order to make the market look better so that we can have a quantitative easing cycle. And all those that own stocks and real estate can get happy saying, yay, we got the stock market up again. We got the real estate market up again. Aren't we the greatest economy in the world? As the national debt shafts people, more and more homeless, addicted to drugs as a result. And Elizabeth Warren gets to blame it on China, of course, saying that all these opioids are all coming from China. They're the evil ones, forgetting that it is actually the Fed and the banking lobby that is paying her checks, and the Israeli lobby that is paying her checks to think certain things, vote in certain ways. And of course, they will lobby for the Fed to cut rates. So Elizabeth Warren and her cronies write to the Fed demanding that rates are cut because ECB has already done it and other central banks have already done it. Why have they done it? Because they managed to delay the inevitable Basel III. Remember all those liabilities on banks' balance sheet? And by asking them to be more capitalized so that we are less at risk of having to do a bailout on taxpayer and inflation money for the banks that are recklessly lending, well, they got to delay their Basel III so reserve requirements can shrink. They can create more digital currency. They can issue more loans. They can pump that into real estate. That can then be leveraged by the wealthy to borrow at 0% from the quantitative easing cycle, so they can push up their stock prices, and we create more and more wealth inequality by delaying Basel III. Now, I'm no fan of regulations. Let banks go bust. There was jokes in Congress around, do we really want to move back to free banking? Of course we do. We want digital, hard, sound money. We want sound money, which is the constitutional, command to have sound money. And now we got global sound money. And then we can move into free banking, let the free market go. That's what we want. We don't want crony capitalism that creates wealth inequality, as I've described. But they're delaying that anyway. But the regulations don't make any difference anyway, because it is the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme, backed by the credit rating of the US government. And capital requirements will remain smaller as required. At the same time, we had some more innovation in El Salvador. El Salvador has actually now set up a Bitcoin bank. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be doing, but if you remember, during COVID, I only made 2 trips. I didn't make any trips because I was I wouldn't go anywhere that would require me to be vaccinated. But President Bukele said that I didn't need to be vaccinated to come to El Salvador. But if I wanted to go to El Salvador from where I was, I had to go from my island to London. And then to get into London, you had to be vaccinated. Then you fly to America. To get into America, you had to be vaccinated. Then you can get into El Salvador. So I had to do a private jet in order to get there. I did 2 visits during that in order to discuss how you can build the Wall Street based upon Bitcoin and digital hard sound money. Now we're starting to see the regulatory regime come through, the virtual asset regime, and now we're starting to see Bitcoin banks. My guess is that they're probably going to be allowing people to custody their Bitcoin, borrow against it, but they're starting to do investment banking where they're investing in different infrastructure, and different companies have gone out there. A hotel is raising finance on the Bitcoin Liquid network as a Bitcoin security token. And we're starting to see more and more financing options for those companies. They've created a tax haven and a tax hub for companies that want to set up there, and they're doing the right things to fight the oppression of the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. And of course, the Bank of England, if you watch back in my video, said they are concerned because the IMF is very concerned about El Salvador. But now they get crime down to 0, they get savings back into the economy, and they start building an industry based upon digital hard sound money. At the same time, there is the Russian stock exchange, the Moscow Stock Exchange. It is now suspending all trading between in any of its stocks, US dollars and euro. So now you have to use the Chinese yuan and Russian currency, and they're the largest. The Chinese yuan is the largest foreign currencies. What else did they have as the second largest? Let me have a look. Yeah, it became the largest on the Moscow Stock Exchange. So now you can't trade US dollars or euro transactions. This was a result of the financial sanctions. So we now know that when financial weapons of mass destructions are fired, i.e. NATO expands into Ukraine, that then led to financial weapons of mass destruction being fired by Putin and Russia. that then leads to taking over territories of Ukraine, and Britain, America, and Germany sending more and more money and more debt, while both Russian and Ukrainian civilians are killed, and more Ukrainian civilians are killed, as the president that became a billionaire in Ukraine is lapping up all of this money, at the same time as putting more and more people to fight these wars. And everyone's falling for it, and we're all paying for it through inflation. That then gets retaliated by a financial weapon of mass destruction from Europe and America that leads to sanctioning of central banks, that then leads to countries that are the victim of such sanctioning being able to construct trade between each other. And it took us to this multipolar world where Russia, China, and Iran that are being threatened by those sanctions ended up with Russia being a $2.2 trillion economy on $500 million of debt, with one of the best debt to GDP ratios because it's backed by resources. At the same time, China has now, over the last 10 years, backed through its Belt and Road Initiative, 3,000 projects, which is $1 trillion invested, which is, kind of the IMF strategy. Look, I don't think any of these governments are going to be better leaders. It's a change of power. I think governments should be smaller. These are very large governments. But the only thing that's going to make governments smaller is if we have competition between countries, by having competition between currencies. And the only way we get a less oppressive central banking regime is when people can opt out, which is why Bitcoin is a resistance movement against the corruption of the central banks that created these Ponzi schemes that end up creating the atrocities that we experience today. But now the Chinese yuan is the main foreign currency held by the Russian central bank as well. And Russia supports the United States in terms of supplying gas to Europe in May. So even though you've got these Europe blocks, Germany wants to do business with China. It's selling loads of its vehicles. America is saying we want to put 100% tariffs on China because we don't want Tesla and other electric vehicles to compete with the ones that are coming out of China that are serving Central and South America and allowing people to buy cars and electric vehicles significantly cheaper. And so they escalate a trade war, and that trade war gets more escalation around the microchip industry that is needed to put in all these electric vehicles. And then you get further and closer to China wanting to reunify with Taiwan as the US trade war gets more and more aggressive. We have to learn to give free markets a try. We like competition. These central banking monopolies are destroying everything through these fiat currencies. And so in May, Europe has to do more trade with Russia and these natural gas routes, even though Nord Stream was blown up by many speculate America in order to get the American natural gas industry from Texas to supply more reliable gas to Europe. So this is where we enter into the geopolitical side. We have all of these different macro forces pumping the Ponzi schemes. And in the last 2 weeks, we had the G7, the largest 7 economies. They all agreed that they're going to provide Ukraine loans worth $50 billion. Ukraine needs another $50 billion in order to tragically kill more Ukrainians, which leads to a doubling of the military-industrial complex. What's the difference between the Russian military-industrial complex and the American military-industrial complex? Well, with America, all of the military companies get the money and profits. With Russia, the government gets the money and profits, which then allows them to fuel and invest significantly more. While the military-industrial complex is clipping the money out of the American people, and the profits are remaining there, and some of it trickles back, you end up with the American government going broker and broker and broker, while the Russian government is getting richer and richer and richer. It doesn't work. The more these governments interfere, the more the opposite effect happens, and the more the central bank benefits as well. And we end up with more and more loans from that. So the G7 said we got to give more and more loans to Ukraine. We know the impact of that. We need peace. We need negotiations. We need to accept the consequences of this shit show that has been created by expanding military-industrial complex and allowing these lobbies to control government and central banks occupy our countries. So using, what did we say? So they're going to be using essentially the windfall profits from confiscated Russian sovereign assets in order to repay them. And this essentially builds upon the EU work action, where essentially they already offsetted some of these windfall profits, and they reinvested that into they said they're going to invest it into Ukraine's reconstruction. And guess what that reconstruction is going to look like? Well, of course, it's going to be a smart city built upon artificial intelligence, connected to a central bank digital currency. And you're going to need to resist, Ukrainians. You're going to need to resist. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, as it does for everyone else. Russia says that it treats that it's ready to now start arming the enemies of United States, since the US is arming Ukraine. Russia then says it's willing to arm the enemies of the United States. Hence, we end up with Iran alliances, China alliances, and all of a sudden we saw President Putin running around flexing as he visited for the first time in 25 years North Korea with a physical visit. And he was welcomed with open arms in North Korea. And so you start to see these different trends now, another nuclear force that are now being aligned as a result of this, because we need to compete in a multipolar world. He also went to visit Vietnam. If I've been to Vietnam quite a few times, if you ever get to see the Vietnamese War Museum, I challenge anybody, any grown man, to go to the Vietnamese War Museum and see all of the homeless people that are still deformed with deformed with their legs amputated, deformities all across their face from chemical warfare. And if you go into the Vietnam War Museum and see the atrocities that come from war and from these chemical weapons that were used in the Vietnamese War, you'll want to avoid war. You will walk out of there. I challenge you, any grown man, you walk out there in crying like crazy, just as I did, when you see the impact that this has. And if it may not impact you, understand that while your money is being used, it has a massive impact outside your country, and it threatens your national security when the attack budget goes away from being a defense budget. So now, of course, NATO is now preparing for ground war with Russia. That includes plans to put US troops on the ground in Russia, according to NATO. Are America ready to do that? Do they really think that this is something that they're willing to go for? Russia's just committed to doubling the budget based upon oil budget as well. We got to recognize that this ain't working the way it's meant to work. Russia now announces plans that it's going to export coal to India, and that's going to be done through an Iranian railway. So these new corridors are being built. We had an announcement from United States and France. They announced plans that they're going to send the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. We then had Russian warships over the last 2 weeks, along with nuclear-powered submarines. They will all arrive at Cuba, which is close to America. They also arrived near England as well. Now, maybe these things have happened before and it's just a flex, but nuclear warships and submarines are now being sent across to United States borders and United Kingdom borders. We all know that nuclear submarines, if you've done any, I'm not a military expert by any way, shape, but I've read and listened to many other experts. They say that submarines are very hard to detect, and one of those blows up, we would be in a global Armageddon within 90 seconds, I think they said, because of the policy of having to retaliate. This is what we have to avoid. This impacts us all. What else did we had? Russia, they published footage of showing their warships and nuclear submarines arriving in Cuba, as we said. So Cuba is the one that is allowing a route around America that's not necessarily ideologically aligned because of all the sanctions that are happening. And at the same time, we saw really big escalation. Now, none of this is being covered as much before, but because I really do follow everything that's happening within the Israeli side and the Palestine side, we saw over the last 2 weeks the $320 million port that America essentially launched. So $320 million to create its own port. And we were told that Israel's saying humanitarian aid's coming through. Even though if you speak to anybody in the hospitals, I know people on the ground now that I speak to regularly, when you speak to people, they're starving. It's famine. They're not getting any aid. It's not coming in. It's a humanitarian crisis. So rather than making it exposed and known that Israel's not letting anything in, and is not coming in through the Egyptian side, they said, we're going to build a port to let humanitarian aid in. No humanitarian aid came in. In fact, it was used in order to bring troops. It was used in order to be a part of the humanitarian truck that came in and went and massacred people as part of the operation. So we had about 275 Palestinians massacred in a hospital, and that did lead to 4 Israeli hostages rescued. One of those is an IDF soldier, so that would be a prisoner of war. The others were ex-IDF soldiers as well. But all of those hostages and prisoners of wars, they look like they were in good shape. So thank you. That's good to know that they're being treated well, as from what we can see. But obviously, this is the fog of war, and there's all sorts of propaganda on either side. But at the same time, the Israeli military, the minister, Benny Gantz, he's decided to resign from the war cabinet, and he is revealing his reasons is because Netanyahu never wanted to end this war. This is not about the hostages. That's why there's hundreds of thousands lobbying him outside. This is about expanding settlements. This is about a land grab. This is about making Palestine unlivable. And this is about, fulfilling the Zionist vision. Let's not pretend that this is anything else as well. So we had more and more global outrage. We had Colombia. They officially decided to suspend all coal sales to Israel. And this wasn't covered at all. So I'm going to cover it here. I do believe that we may be near the end of this. And that is because there was some video footage released that came from the resistance movement in Lebanon and Iran's allies and Palestinians' allies. They came out. There was a big speech by the leader of Hezbollah. And they released one day before the speech, they released a video. And this video was showing drones that completely circumvented the Iron Dome, that Israel knew nothing about, that was able to identify all of the key strategic points at which Hezbollah could launch a missile strike on if they wanted to. But obviously, they've said from day one, as has the resistance movement in Palestine, they've said from day one, we just want to release our hostages, we'll do the swap, and this can all be over early on. But Netanyahu and Israel don't want to do that. They want to make you think that this is something completely different to what it actually is. So this could have actually lead to the stopping and escalation, at least from the Middle Eastern side of World War III. So what they did is they released that footage. It shows that they've got the intelligence, and they've had the intelligence all along to beat the Iron Dome. but they don't want war. They just want to give Palestine its state and self-determination. They called the video episode 1. So they're saying this is just the beginning. There's more. Now, remember, the US always will fight for Israel because it's a symbolic move. It's kind of like taking down the Berlin Wall. So there has to be a Palestinian self-determination, but Israel won't allow that and doesn't want that to happen. And Israel needs to remain as a state in order to, get the geopolitical posturing so that we can avoid World War III. Look, America needs to accept that we're no longer in unipolar, we're in multipolar. And multipolar is great for America. This is great. Go for the American first narrative. So the next president of the United States is going to be responsible from a non-US perspective for ensuring that we have that peaceful transition to a multipolar world. And America looks like it's still strong. It is still a major force, a major economy. All of these economies need to work with each other, and we need to avoid that, the thing that's destructive for us all. Because there was a video as well that said in the announcement that Hezbollah is ready to take on Cyprus. My mother lives in Cyprus. Cyprus is split into 3. It's got the Turkish quarter, it's got the Cypriot quarter, section, and then it's still a UK military base. So if Hezbollah is able to go from Lebanon and launch any type of attack in Cyprus, that is UK escalation. You can see where this is all going. It's massive, massive posturing. And this is what we need to all understand and not get scammed by our media into thinking that this is something that is not. Because it's not what you're being told. Follow the money and you can get to the truth. So there is a massive UK military base in Cyprus. And there is a port that goes from Cyprus to Gaza. And there is natural gas in the sea. And there is troops that are being put in through the military-industrial complex. And America and Britain designed the Middle East to never be in peace so it could pilgrim its gas and natural and its oil and destabilize any of the puppet monarchies that they put in. And there was an Iranian revolution that said we can topple those monarchies, and therefore we need to form alliances, and we need to make sure that that revolution that was supporting the Palestinian cause, that is part of the Israeli lobby, and the Israeli lobby owns all the Congress in US, that is passing laws where the money goes back from the Federal Reserve over to Israel, and then it comes back to bribe politicians. And Jeffrey Epstein reveals that all of these networks are being used by intelligence agencies like the CIA and Mossad and the French and the British and the Five Eyes, and even organizations like the 4-letter word that we're told we have to launch a war on terror against is actually being used in order to make us think that there needs to be one. And this 4-letter agency begins with I and ends with S, is being used by intelligence agencies like Mossad and CIA in order to make us feel a certain way. And this money then goes back into controlling the media so they can control the narrative. So we on X Spaces have to debunk the narrative. So we recognize that we're all being scammed into occupation by central banks. And there is a resistance movement against it called Bitcoin. And people ask me, why do you talk about Bitcoin macro and geopolitics? Stay in your lane. It's all connected. The only reason I found Bitcoin in the first place is because I knew the world needed non-fractional reserve banking, because it was taking us down a path that none of us wants to get. And we all need to warn each other so that we are fully prepared. So imagine an escalation into Cyprus. That means 2 NATO countries, Turkey and Cyprus, European Union members, Cyprus, members of NATO. One supports the Palestinian cause. The other has EU alignment. We are dividing the world into this global north and global south. Let's just accept it. Let's let BRICS have its currency. Let's not do these sanctions. Let's call out these military industrial complexes for what they are. Let's de-escalate. And that's meant to be a message that's not peaceful. Anyway, imagine what we get there. Hopefully we don't have to get there. Now, Hezbollah also said, we are ready to fight by by air, by sea, and by land. What does that mean? That doesn't mean missiles in the ground. That means there is an alliance with airplanes or with fighter jets. Where would that come from? That can only come from alliances. So let's accept. That's the world we are in right now. Israel wants to escalate this. This very center of the world, there has to be Palestine in order to de-escalate this. And so we have to recognize that you, the Americans, the Brits, and the Germans funding the Israeli aggression is what is causing this. And that can be reversed overnight by one phone call saying, let's demilitarize, let's negotiate, and let's accept we're in a multipolar world. And the next president of the United States is the one that has to do that. Do you trust the person that can barely put together a sentence? Do you trust the person that's, they're all Zionist controlled, obviously, they've all got massive, massive paychecks. But who do you trust in order to navigate this? Do you trust the guy that's being convicted that wants to drain the swamp? Well, I don't trust any of them. And I don't trust Putin. And I don't trust Xi Jinping. So I exit, which is why Bitcoin gives us the opportunity to resist against central banking. But we still need to work with these leaders because these leaders will take us to World War III. So we need to control the media by fighting back on social media, exposing the truth so that we all recognize we don't fall for the shit that our governments are feeding us. Now, guess what? After this video, for the first time, Israel sat down to negotiate. First time. And now everyone's negotiating. I'm not sure what's going to come of it. But at the same time, as we enter into this new negotiation, the next president of the United States needs to figure out how to have a good relationship with China so it doesn't reunify with Taiwan and create that $2.2 trillion of destruction that I estimated in my previous videos, if you watch that previous broadcast. We need somebody that's going to accept. Unfortunately, because of this NATO expansion, Russia got aggressive, and now some of Ukraine is going to be gone over to Russia. That's a negotiation. Do we need to kill more people? And Palestine does need to be free and needs to have self-determination. And both Saudi Arabia and Iran needs to normalize between each other in order to have peace in the Middle East. And America needs to retrieve its foreign policy, stop being occupied. And we can call out Congress for what this is. Federal Reserve controlled money printing that goes to lobby groups, special interest groups, that borrows at 0% through quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve, that bribes politicians, that uses Israel in order to have disgusting bribery networks that was revealed in the Epstein files and the X files to control media and to control politicians in order to do what they want and create false narratives and false flag operations to make us think that we're all in a religious war between the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, the atheists, and all that stuff. Recognize it. We need to get through this together. And so now North Korea suddenly said, we're going to join the BRICS bloc. And Zimbabwe says, our currency's been destroyed. We're going to formally apply to join BRICS. Russian President Putin said that BRICS is now developing its own international payment system. We all know that's going to be a central bank digital currency. We all know it's going to be a tool for oppression, just like it will be in America. We are moving to a central bank digital currency world. And we have this multipolar world rather than unipolar that makes more competition. And as long as we have competition with central banks, competition with currencies, competition with hard money, with Bitcoin, with gold, then maybe those central bank digital currencies will be something that can be tools for freedom rather than tools for oppression. Because the one I'm going to be used is the one that's backed by the most Bitcoin and the one that generates the most amount of freedom rather than the oppression that we all know large governments backed by central banks in a proof of weapons network that prints money that turns a defense budget into an attack budget will only allow for. So BRICS is now working on their own independent payment system, free from political pressure. They said they're going to do it transparently. We shall see. Free from political pressure, abuse, and in external pressure, i.e. sanctions as well. So I think we're going to close it here. How did I do for time? I'm about 10 minutes over. Not too bad. Let me summarize this. So we had Bitcoin becoming a geopolitical issue, a political issue in the US election, and now all the other countries around the world saying we want to mine the final Bitcoins. And as long as we can geographically make sure that the hash power is diversified, we definitely don't want all the hash power in America. As much as I love what's happening in America, it needs to be some in China, some in America, some in Africa, some in the Middle East. And all of the resources need to be repurposed so that we can use Bitcoin as an apolitical tool for peace. And if we end up in World War III, it can be an ideal tool for people to clear between countries, both at the individual level, the corporate level, to protect. And remember, stock markets close during war. So we don't want that. We would get a reset. And I hope we don't have to get there, but we got to be prepared either way. So the next president, as I said, it's symbolic. Israel falling because I think right now they're negotiating because they've lost. And by lost, it's a different type of thing. It's because we, the people, wouldn't allow them. And South Africa launched a genocide case. We exposed the Israel lobby. They were ready. If they could make you think that this was just 40 beheaded babies, when that was a complete lie, and all the sexual stuff that came out, that now the United Nations is saying there wasn't evidence of that. And in fact, there was evidence on the other side. And we saw the Apache helicopters that led to Israel being having to take away their own people in order to ensure that those hostages weren't negotiation tools. All of it is out there right now. All evidence from all the reputable people. The mainstream narrative was a complete scam. And Biden was the one that perpetrated it and said that he saw it when he hadn't seen anything. Of course, we need Israel and Palestine to survive. It would be too symbolic as the fall of the Berlin Wall, as I said. And so now the best narrative is the one that does the American first narrative, the one that defunds NATO, the one that defunds the IMF, the one that ends the Fed, the one that says we're going to drain the swamp and exposes AIPAC, even though that won't happen. And I know that I am no fan of all the lies and all the things that have been presented. But I think that is where we're headed right now. We need to make America move to multipolar, make it look like a victory, and go to the America first side. We need to make sure that there is no reunification with Taiwan and China because America has good relations with China. It doesn't get scared of competition. It accepts that we need to work with each other and also works on making sure it's got its own resources, as every country should be. The president has to accept that there is going to be a negotiation with Russia if we don't want to kill more Ukrainians funded by the IMF and central banks, and defund NATO, defund the IMF, move towards ending the Fed, because at the end of it, make sure you got a Bitcoin policy to hedge against your central bank, because your central bank will be putting you on the wrong side of financial history at the end of this. Let's go for competition. Let's avoid World War III. And always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. And I want you to be on the right side of this change. Let's do it with peace. Let's do it with love. Let's do it with unity. And as always, I will be back this time next week. And that's going to do it for episode 35 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you want to be more prepared I'm creating more and more resources to help people prepare themselves. Head over to simondixon.com. Make sure you are a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Absolutely free. Give you updates every week. And you can catch up on old videos if you want, just in case YouTube takes them down if they don't like some of the message. And I've got a bunch of other projects that I'm going to be working on as well with Bank to the Future to support people in making this transition at both the individual level, the corporate level, and the sovereign country and central bank digital currency level, as you choose.